The key didn't fit. I stood there under the oppressive July sun, the little brass key feeling useless and foreign in my hand. The smell of diesel from a neighbor's lawnmower mixed with the sharp scent of dry pine needles from the woods bordering our community. It was a smell that usually meant summer, kids' laughter, and the crack of a baseball bat. But not today. Today, it smelled like a problem. A new, brutally industrial padlock hung on the hasp of the community sports shed. It was a heavy, soulless chunk of metal, a stark contrast to the old, friendly lock, whose key I'd carried for 5 years. This wasn't a mistake. This was a statement. I jiggled the key one last time, the sound of metal scraping against metal grating on my nerves. "That won't work, Mike." The voice was smooth, confident, and utterly devoid of warmth. I turned. There she was, Karen, the newly elected head of our homeowners association, standing with her arms crossed, a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. She wore her usual uniform, a beige pantsuit that looked completely out of place on a Saturday afternoon, and a slight, self-satisfied smile. Flanking her were 2 large men in navy blue polos with a generic community security logo stitched on the chest. They weren't neighbors, they were hired muscle. I pulled the key out of the useless lock. "Karen, what's this?" "It's called compliance, Mike," she said, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on her clipboard. "The shed is a fire hazard. It's been officially sealed pending a full safety review. This is the kind of story you hear about, the slow-motion train wreck you can't look away from. And if you're watching Karenology, you know it's never just a simple misunderstanding. It's always the start of something." Behind me, a small group of kids, baseball gloves in hand, had gone quiet. Their chatter and energy, which usually filled the park, had evaporated. They were just watching, their faces a mixture of confusion and disappointment. This shed held everything for our little community league. The bases, the bats, the helmets, the chalk liner for the field. It was the heart of their summer. I'm an old firefighter, pushing 60, with a bad knee that reminds me of my past every single morning. I've seen real fire hazards. I've walked through buildings where the air itself was ready to ignite. This shed, a simple wooden structure with some sports gear, wasn't one of them. A fire hazard? It's a shed, Karen. We've used it for years. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, my fingers brushing against the cool, heavy steel of my old adjustable wrench. It's a habit. The wrench had cost me my career after a roof collapse, but it had saved a whole block of homes that day. It was a part of me, a reminder of who I was. "Years of neglect, you mean," she countered, her voice dripping with condescension. "But don't worry, the homeowners association has it under control." She stepped forward and handed me a folded piece of paper from her clipboard. "This is the official notice from the insurance underwriters. It's all by the book." I took the paper. It felt heavier than it should. I unfolded it, my eyes scanning the technical jargon, the list of supposed violations. Improper storage of flammable materials. What? The wood varnish for the bats? Lack of certified fire suppression system. In a 10 by 10 foot shed? It was nonsense. But then my eyes fell to the bottom of the page, to the signature. Have you ever seen a name on a piece of paper that just knocked the wind clean out of you? It wasn't some faceless bureaucrat. It wasn't a stranger. The signature was crisp, confident, and devastatingly familiar. David Miller, certified risk assessor. Dave, my old partner. The man who'd pulled me from the rubble that ended my career. The friend I'd have trusted with my life. His name was right there, authorizing this entire circus. The sounds of the park seemed to fade away. The hum of the lawnmower, the distant traffic, the chirping birds. All of it just dissolved into a low buzz in my ears. Karen was still talking, something about rules and community standards, but her voice was a million miles away. All I could see was that signature. She hadn't just locked a door, she'd lit a fuse. And the worst part? She'd used the hand of a man I once called a brother to do it. That signature stared up at me from the page, a ghost from another life. Dave Miller. The world narrowed to just those 2 words. Karen was still talking, her voice a meaningless drone, but I didn't hear her. I felt the paper tremble slightly in my hand. The kids, sensing the fun was over, began to drift away in 2s and 3s, their shoulders slumped. The silence they left behind was louder than any of their cheers had ever been. "Mike, are you listening?" Karen's sharp tone cut through the fog. "The rules are for everyone." I slowly folded the paper, the crease sharp and angry. I looked from her face, smug and victorious, to the two security guards who watched me with blank, impassive eyes. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked away. There was nothing to say to her. The real conversation needed to be with someone else. Back in my small house, the scent of fresh-cut grass from outside felt like a mockery. I sat at my kitchen table, the official notice spread out before me like a verdict. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over Dave's name in my contacts. We hadn't talked much since he'd left the force and gone corporate, but we were still Dave and Mike. We'd been through hell together. That had to mean something, right? The phone rang once, then clicked. A smooth, recorded voice answered, "You've reached the office of David Miller at Sterling Risk Management. Please leave a message." Office. Not Dave, not even his own voice, just a sterile, anonymous greeting. I hung up without leaving a message. What would I even say? "Hey Dave, remember that time we held a collapsing roof up with a 2x4? Anyway, why are you helping a petty tyrant shut down a kid's baseball league?" It sounded pathetic even in my head. The next morning, it got worse. The mailman delivered another crisp, white envelope from the Homeowners Association. You know that feeling you get when you see an official-looking letter? Your stomach does a little flip. Mine did a full-on gymnastic routine. I tore it open. It wasn't a letter, it was an invoice. My eyes scanned the lines. Emergency safety inspection fee, $3,000. Emergency? They'd called it in themselves. Risk mitigation deposit, $10,000. A deposit, as if we were renting a tool from them. A deposit that, the fine print noted, was potentially non-refundable pending the outcome of the full safety review. Let me put this in perspective for you. Our little league runs on hot dog sales and a few generous donations from local businesses. The entire balance in our account was $4,517. This wasn't a bill. This was a death sentence. The letter was full of bloated corporate speak about ensuring the long-term value of our community assets and a vision for a revitalized recreation zone. It was buried in the second paragraph, a single line about a proposed project to build an elite barbecue pavilion. A quick look at the community plan on the HOA website confirmed it. The pavilion was slated to be built right where the shed stood. This wasn't about safety. It was a land grab, plain and simple. Have you ever been hit with a problem so big it just paralyzes you for a second? That's where I was. Staring at an impossible number on a piece of paper, my supposed best friend's signature still burning a hole in my memory. They weren't just trying to move a shed. They were trying to erase us. I looked at the invoice again, the black ink stark against the white paper. The number hadn't changed, $13,000, and it was due in 30 days. The $13,000 demand sat on my kitchen table, a monument to how fast things can go wrong. My first instinct was to fight, not with lawyers or paperwork, but the way I knew how, to confront, to call it out, to find Dave and demand he look me in the eye and explain. But that was the old Mike, the one who solved problems with force and adrenaline. This was a different kind of fire. The next afternoon, the war went public. I was checking my email when a notification popped up from the neighborhood social media group. The post was from Karen. It included a photo of the shed, taken with a wide-angle lens from a low angle, making the sturdy little building look like a crumbling, sinister shack from a horror movie. The wood appeared warped, the roofline sagged, and the shadows were deep and menacing. It was a masterpiece of dishonest photography. The text was even worse. "A concerned resident reached out about the safety of this old structure," she began, the fake sincerity practically dripping off the screen. She went on to mention my name, not as the guy who'd run the kids' league for free for 5 years, but as the individual responsible. She didn't call me a bad person directly. She didn't have to. She was much smarter than that. She wrote about my well-documented history, a vague but sinister phrase that could mean anything. She hinted at my departure from the fire department, framing it not as a line-of-duty injury, but as something more ambiguous. "We all respect his service," she wrote, "but we must wonder if the stress of his past has unfortunately clouded his judgment regarding current safety protocols." It was a brilliant piece of character assassination, subtle, deniable, and devastating. She painted me as a ticking time bomb, a traumatized veteran clinging to a dangerous pet project. What would you do if you saw your reputation being dismantled, one carefully chosen word at a time. The comments started rolling in immediately. "I had no idea it was that bad," from one parent. "Thank you for being proactive, Karen," from another. "My kids play near there. This is terrifying." My allies, the parents who knew me, tried to defend me, but their voices were drowned out in a sea of manufactured panic. Donations to the league's online fundraiser, which had been trickling in, stopped. Then one pledge was withdrawn, then another. I just sat there, watching the number go down. It felt like watching my own blood drain away. Later that day, I was in my front yard, pulling weeds with a little too much force, when old Mr. Henderson, the retired gardener from 2 streets over, ambled by. He's a quiet man who mostly keeps to himself, his hands permanently stained with the good earth. He nodded at me, his eyes lingering on my aggressive weeding technique. "Heard about the shed," he said, his voice raspy like dry leaves. "Yeah, looks like I'm public enemy number 1, I replied, trying for a joke that didn't land. He grunted, looking down the street toward Karen's meticulously landscaped property. "Funny," he said, more to himself than to me. "She's so worried about that shed, but not about the old drainage pipe that floods my back garden every single spring." I stopped pulling weeds. I knew the pipe he was talking about, a big corrugated metal thing that was part of the original 70s-era subdivision infrastructure. I thought the county fixed that years ago. "Nope," he said, shaking his head slowly. "They capped the old exit by the main road, said the new storm drain system made it redundant. But every time we get a heavy rain, the water's got nowhere to go, comes right up into my petunias." He shrugged as if it were just another fact of life, like gravity or taxes. He tipped his worn-out baseball cap and continued his slow walk down the street. I stood there, dirt on my knees, watching him go. A strange thought sparked in my mind, a connection that had nothing to do with sheds or safety or barbecue pavilions. It was a detail that didn't fit the picture Karen was painting. And in my experience, the details that don't fit are the only ones that matter. That little comment from Mr. Henderson about the drainage pipe stuck with me. It was a loose thread in Karen's perfectly woven narrative, and I couldn't resist pulling on it. But first, I had to deal with the man whose name was at the bottom of my troubles. I had to talk to Dave. I finally got him on the phone a couple of days later. I'd decided against anger. I'd try reason, friendship, history. "Dave, it's Mike," I said, keeping my voice even. "Mikey, hey man, how's it going?" His voice was a little too loud, a little too cheerful, the voice of a salesman, not a friend. "I'm looking at your signature on a takedown notice for a kid's sports shed, Dave. How do you think it's going?" The false cheer evaporated. "Look, Mike, I'm sorry about that. My hands were tied." "Tied by who? The homeowners association?" "It's not that simple," he said, a weary sigh on the other end of the line. "This is business. The underwriters have new standards. That whole area is flagged for liability issues. It's old, it's not up to code." I cut him off. "It's a shed, Dave, and you and I both know it's safer than half the buildings we ever walked into." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, more conspiratorial. "Listen to me, Mike. I can't undo the report. It's filed. But I can help you navigate this. I can give you a little advice off the record." This is what I'd been hoping for. A crack in the wall. An inside man. "I'm listening," I said. "Don't fight them on the big stuff. That's a losing battle. Karen's got the board wrapped around her finger. Instead, give them a small victory. Acknowledge some of the minor violations. Show you're cooperating. It'll calm her down, buy you some time. I'll even send you a copy of an old city ordinance I found. It's obscure, but it gives the association broad powers in these matters. If you show them you know about it, they'll see you've done your homework and are willing to be reasonable." It sounded plausible, a strategic retreat. It was the kind of advice a friend would give. "Okay, Dave, send it over." "I'll email it to you now," he said, his voice back to its friendly, helpful tone. "We'll get through this, Mikey. We always do." He sent the email a few minutes later. It was a scanned PDF of a city ordinance from 1988, full of dense legalese about community standards and property maintenance. It seemed to confirm everything he said, giving the homeowners association almost unchecked authority over common areas. It felt like a setback, but it also felt like a strategy. Dave was right. A head-on fight was suicide. A tactical compromise was the only way. The next week, I met with a young father from the neighborhood, a lawyer named Mr. Chen. He was smart and eager to help, a fresh-faced idealist who still believed the rules were there to protect people. He'd volunteered to represent the league at the upcoming public hearing. I showed him the ordinance Dave had sent. "This is tough," Chen said, frowning as he read. "It's old, but it seems pretty clear. It gives them a lot of leeway. Dave's advice is probably sound. Let's draft a letter acknowledging the smaller points. Say, agreeing to install a new fire extinguisher and update the wiring and present it at the hearing. It shows good faith." It felt wrong. It felt like bowing down. But it was the only play we had. We spent the evening crafting a careful, conciliatory statement. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but I trusted Dave. He'd never let me down before. The night of the public hearing, the City Hall meeting room was packed. It felt less like a hearing and more like a public shaming. Karen sat at the front table with her lawyer, looking serene and in control. When it was my turn, I walked to the podium, our carefully crafted statement in hand. I took a deep breath and began to speak, my voice sounding strange and distant in the microphone. I spoke about the league, about the kids. Then I moved to the conciliatory part of our plan. "While we contest the overall assessment," I said, choosing my words carefully, "we acknowledge that certain aspects of the shed could be improved. We are prepared to address the minor safety concerns outlined in the report." Before I could finish, the Homeowners Association's lawyer, a slick man with a shark smile, stood up. "Mr. Chairman," he said, his voice booming through the room, "we thank Mr. Donovan for his admission." My blood ran cold. Admission? "However," the lawyer continued, turning to me, "I must ask him which ordinance he is referring to when he speaks of the association's authority in this matter." I was confused. Chen and I exchanged a look. "The 1988 Municipal Code, Section 4, I said, quoting the document Dave had given me. The lawyer's smile widened. "Ah, yes, the 1988 Code, a fascinating historical document. It's just a shame for Mr. Donovan that it was repealed in its entirety 5 years ago." He turned back to the chairman. "What is relevant is Mr. Donovan's public admission of existing safety violations, an admission which, under current state law, gives the association full and immediate authority to demolish the structure as a confirmed public nuisance." The room was silent. I looked across the crowd, my eyes searching for Dave. He was there, sitting in the back row. He wasn't smiling. He just stared back at me, his face a perfect mask of blank indifference. And in that moment, I understood. It wasn't bad advice. It wasn't a mistake. It was a trap. And I had walked right into it. The lawyer's words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Demolish the structure. The phrase echoed in the dead silence of the room. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and the cold satisfaction of those who had sided with Karen from the start. I looked at Chen, my young lawyer ally. His face was pale, his mouth slightly agape. He was just as blindsided as I was. My gaze drifted back to the man in the last row, Dave. He didn't flinch. He just held my stare for a beat, then gave a slight, almost imperceptible shrug as if to say, "That's business." And then he looked away, breaking a bond that had been forged in fire and smoke 20 years ago. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you thought was your brother? It feels like the ground beneath your feet just turns to dust. I walked back to my seat, the floorboards groaning under my feet. The rest of the hearing was a blur. Karen's lawyer made a motion, the board voted, and it was over. The Homeowners Association now had legal permission to tear down my shed, my kids' shed. The walk home was the longest of my life. The night was cool, but I was burning up inside. Humiliation is a hot, corrosive acid. Betrayal is a cold, heavy stone in your gut. I had both. I got to my house and went straight to the garage, my sanctuary. The place was filled with the ghosts of old projects, the scent of sawdust and oil. I stood there in the dark, the only light coming from a single street lamp outside. I felt broken. Not just defeated, but fundamentally broken. They had used my own decency, my own willingness to find a middle ground, as a weapon against me. They'd used my oldest friendship as the bait. I sank onto an old stool, my head in my hands. Every path I had taken had led to a dead end. The law wasn't on my side. Public opinion had been poisoned. My friend was my enemy. It was over. I had lost. For a long moment, I just sat there, listening to the quiet hum of the garage refrigerator, feeling the weight of it all settle on my shoulders. I thought about just giving up. Let them have their stupid barbecue pit. Let them win. What was the point? And then, through the fog of my despair, a voice echoed in my memory. A raspy, quiet voice. Funny. She's worried about that shed, but not about the old drainage pipe. Mr. Henderson, the gardener, the petunias. It was a crazy thought, a desperate grasping at straws kind of thought. What did a clogged drain have to do with any of this? It was a completely different problem. But that was the point. My fight had been focused on the shed. I was playing on Karen's board, by her rules. What if the game wasn't about the shed at all? What if I could change the board entirely? A new energy surged through me, pushing back the despair. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something harder, colder. It was the feeling I used to get right before kicking down a door into a burning room. The moment you stop thinking and start acting. I stood up and walked to my workbench. I grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight, a pair of work gloves, and my old, reliable adjustable wrench, the one that felt like an extension of my own hand. The clock on the wall read almost midnight. The neighborhood was asleep. I slipped out my back door and into the darkness. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and night-blooming jasmine. I didn't head toward the park. I didn't go toward the shed. I headed for the overgrown easement at the edge of the community, where the streetlights didn't reach. I was going to find that drainage pipe. I was done playing their game. It was time to start my own. The night was quiet except for the hum of cicadas and the crunch of my boots on dry leaves. The beam of my flashlight cut a nervous path through the darkness, dancing over tangled vines and thorny bushes. I was in the forgotten corner of the neighborhood, a strip of land that belonged to everyone and no one. This was where the old infrastructure went to die. It took me 20 minutes of searching, but I finally found it. It was bigger than I expected, a 3-foot-wide corrugated metal pipe, mostly hidden by overgrown ivy. It looked like the mouth of a dark, forgotten cave. The air around it was damp and smelled of stagnant water and decay. According to Mr. Henderson, the county had capped the other end by the main road. This end, logically, should have been capped too. But as my light traced its rusty circumference, I saw something that made me stop. There was no cap, no grate. Instead, the opening was crudely sealed with a lumpy, uneven layer of concrete. It wasn't a professional job. It was sloppy, rushed, and parts of it looked fresh. Scuff marks in the dirt, a few discarded cement bags half hidden in the bushes. I knelt down, the damp ground soaking through the knee of my jeans. I ran my glove over the concrete. It was rough, but a small section near the bottom was smoother, a slightly different color. It looked like a patch job on top of another patch job. What I discovered next is something that still sends a shiver down my spine. My old firefighter instincts kicked in. We were trained to see what's wrong with a picture, to spot the anomalies. And this was a big one. Why would someone crudely seal a drain pipe that was officially decommissioned? I took out my heavy adjustable wrench. The cymbal anchor, the tool that had ended my first career, was about to start my second. I used the end of it to chip away at the newest layer of concrete. It flaked off easily. Beneath it, the older concrete was darker, stained with moisture. There was a small hairline crack running through it. I pushed the end of my wrench into the crack and pried. A chunk of concrete broke away with a wet, sucking sound. Water, dark and foul-smelling, began to seep out. It wasn't a flood, just a steady, insistent trickle. The pipe wasn't dry, it was holding water, a lot of it. The pressure from inside was palpable. Mr. Henderson's flooding wasn't from rainwater pooling on the surface. It was from this pipe, this sealed underground lake, overflowing with nowhere to go. Then I saw the key detail. Embedded in the fresh concrete patch was a small, brightly colored plastic tag, the kind contractors use to mark utility lines. It had a code printed on it. I took a picture with my phone. The next day, I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't post on the community page. I called a different kind of expert. I called Old Man Henderson. He came over, looked at the picture of the tag, and just grunted. "That's them," he said. "The landscapers who put in Mrs. Davison's new patio last month. Same crew Karen hired to beautify the park entrance." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Karen's pet contractor, the same one slated to build the barbecue pavilion, was doing work all over the neighborhood, and it seemed they were taking shortcuts, dangerous ones. Sealing this drain was easier and cheaper than rerouting it properly. Who would ever know? It was a forgotten pipe in a forgotten corner of the woods. But here's the thing about water. It always finds a way. And I realized the water from this pipe wasn't just flooding Mr. Henderson's garden. I pulled up the geological survey maps for our area from the county website. Our neighborhood was built on a slight slope. The water seeping from that sealed pipe would follow the path of least resistance, flowing underground, downhill. I traced the line with my finger on the screen. It went past Mr. Henderson's house, past 2 others. And then it went directly under the perfectly manicured, award-winning lawn of one specific property. The water wasn't just a nuisance. It was a slow-moving, silent threat, creating a sinkhole right under Karen's own 2 feet. I now held 2 things in my hand. One was a theory about a looming disaster. The other was a small bag of highly concentrated, non-toxic fluorescent green dye, the kind plumbers use to trace leaks. I had found a new board to play on, and this time, I was making the rules. I looked at the bag of dye, a brilliant, almost nuclear green. It was time for a little science experiment. The annual community fair was Karen's coronation. It was held in the main park, a sprawling green space filled with families, food stalls, and the sound of a local band playing slightly off-key cover songs. Karen was in her element, gliding from group to group, her clipboard replaced by a plate of cookies, her smile brighter and wider than ever. At the center of the park, she had set up a large booth with glossy architectural renderings of her revitalized recreation zone, the centerpiece of which was the barbecue pavilion. She was collecting signatures, basking in the glow of her victory. I arrived just as the band was taking a break. I wasn't carrying signs or shouting. I was carrying a bucket. I walked straight to the center of the park, not far from her booth. A few people noticed me, their conversations tapering off. I stopped at a storm drain grate, one of the main collectors for the park's drainage system. I set the bucket down. It was filled with water, and I held up the bag of green dye for everyone to see. "Folks, could I have your attention for just a moment?" I said, my voice calm and clear. A small crowd started to form. Karen, annoyed at the interruption, began to walk toward me, a frown creasing her perfect smile. "Mike, this is a community event," she started. "Whatever little grievance you have can wait." "This isn't a grievance, Karen," I said, looking not at her but at the crowd. "It's a public safety demonstration." I ripped open the bag of dye and poured it into the bucket. The water instantly turned a vibrant, almost radioactive green. Our homeowners association is very concerned with safety. They're worried a little shed might be a fire hazard, but I'm worried about something else. I'm worried about what happens when you take shortcuts. With that, I poured the entire bucket of glowing green water down the storm drain. For a moment, nothing happened. The crowd watched, confused. Karen looked triumphant, as if I'd just made a fool of myself. "Are you quite finished?" she asked, her voice dripping with scorn. "Almost," I said. I pointed across the park. I wasn't pointing at the shed. I was pointing at her house, which bordered the park, its pristine white walls and perfectly manicured lawn visible to everyone. Just wait. And then it began. A tiny, brilliant green shoot of water sprouted from the middle of her award-winning lawn, like a bizarre alien flower. Then another, and another. Within a minute, her perfect green carpet was dotted with dozens of little geysers of fluorescent water, bubbling up from the oversaturated ground. A collective gasp went through the crowd. I held up my old adjustable wrench. For weeks, Karen has told us she's acting in the interest of safety. But her own preferred contractor, the one she wants to give a $300,000 contract to, took a shortcut. They illegally sealed a major storm drain. I pointed with the wrench toward the woods. To save a few bucks. And for months that water has been pooling underground, turning the soil under her own house into a swamp. I let that sink in. The crowd was silent, all eyes on the bizarre, glowing spectacle on Karen's lawn. "You were so worried about a theoretical fire in my shed, Karen," I said, my voice low but carrying across the park. "You ignored the actual flood under your own house. Some regulations are written in water, not ink." The final blow came from an unexpected direction. Dave's boss, the regional head of the insurance company, happened to be at the fair. He was a friend of one of the residents. He walked forward, his face grim, and addressed Karen in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Ma'am, given this willful alteration of the property's hydrology, I'm afraid Sterling Risk Management will have to suspend your homeowner's policy, effective immediately." The game was over. Her authority, built on a platform of safety and rules, had crumbled into a muddy, glowing green mess. The barbecue pavilion contract was dead. The demolition order for the shed was forgotten. The money they'd demanded from the league was quietly redirected to emergency geological surveys. The next day, I walked over to the shed. The industrial lock was still there. I didn't have the key, but I had my wrench. I fit the jaws of the wrench around the hasp, tightened it, and with one sharp, satisfying twist, the metal shrieked and broke. The door swung open. The familiar smell of old leather and chalk dust washed over me. I didn't file a lawsuit. I didn't go after Dave. Watching his career implode after his boss saw what he'd signed off on was enough. The victory didn't feel triumphant. It felt quiet and lonely. I'd won, but I'd lost a friend. And I'd seen a side of my community and a man I'd trusted that I could never unsee. A few days later, a truck from a foundation repair company pulled up to Karen's house. Her husband, a quiet man I'd barely ever seen speak, came out to meet them. He caught my eye from across the park. He didn't look angry. He just looked tired. He gave me a slow, weary nod, a silent acknowledgement of the ruin she had brought upon them. I nodded back. The kids got their field back, but it came at a price. It always does.